Our slabs have firmed up to a hard cheese consistency, not quite chocolate. That would be a little bit past where we need it, but pretty close. And I am ready to assemble these. So here are my top and bottom. They're the 4x4s. And then here are my sides. And I need to bevel the sides as they go together. And I've already beveled most of them to show you. And it's much like you'd put together a picture frame. If you bevel them, when they come together, they'll meet at an angle and you can work them together. If you don't bevel them, then you will you would have to use butt joints and then do the different math, which you can do, but beveling is kind of a cleaner way to do it. So to bevel these, you can use a knife. What I do is I put the knife down on the board and I go to make sure the cuts lined up at the bottom and hold it at a 45-degree angle and support the clay with my thumb back here. This is not a sharp knife. I mean, you could probably cut yourself with it if you tried, but doing it like this, you won't. And just drag the knife through it. At this consistency, it should cut like cheese. It should cut like a cheddar cheese. And do that. If you're not comfortable doing that, you can use your rasp, and you can rasp down the side. So you can hold it at an angle. I'm going to do it this way because this has an edge that I don't want to cut up the board. Hold my rasp at an angle and start removing clay. And when it gets to the bottom, then I know I'm good. That's almost there. So there we go. I've got 45s. So now I've got 4 sides that are cut at 45s, and I've got my top and bottom, and we're going to assemble. Here is my 4" by 4" bottom. Because this clay is pretty hard, it's at a hard cheese stage, we need to make sure we really get nice and deep scoring on this. We need these to be really well attached. So score that, and I'm going to score the bottom of one of my sides. And we'll use water. And we're going to score again. We want this to get really, really gummy. Okay, we got nice and gummy, and I'm going to line this up and make sure all my sides meet well. And I'm going to push down. This clay is pretty hard, so I shouldn't deform it by doing this. I'm going to really push and trying to apply pressure evenly. I can hold the pieces between my hands and kind of push down. And what I want to see is this slip kind of squishing out at all the places on both sides. And then we'll take our wooden rib that is a 90-degree angle, we'll clean it off. And then we're going to make sure that this is at 90 degrees. We're going to run it across. And clean that slip off. We can run it on the inside too, but it's kind of rounded so it won't get there. So I've got one wall up, and I'm going to put up my other walls. I'm going to slip and score this angle, slip and score here. and we're going to attach. Again, we're going to line up the edges, and we're going to push down, and we're also going to push the corner together. So I'm going to get the bottom adhered pretty well, and then I'm going to push, not trying to deform the clay, but I need to get that seam attached. Again, I'll take my rib and I'm going to run it here and make sure I'm at 90 degrees. And I'm going to put up my other walls. Alright, so I've got all my walls up, and it obviously is going to need some cleaning up on the outside. but we need to address the inside. And the inside, because these walls are quite firm, we want to reinforce all of our seams with coils, just small coils. So what I want to do is I want to slip and score inside this whole thing on all the seams. Use water. And then we'll score again. And while that comes up, we're going to roll out a small coil. I've got a piece of one started here, so I'm going to roll this out smaller, really small, like a small pinky finger. And I need to slip and score this, but I also want to turn it sort of into a more triangular shape. So I'm going to sort of pinch it so that it has an angle that will match the angle that I'm going to be putting it on. So there's less chance that there's going to be an air pocket that's created. It's really important to not create an air bubble by doing this. And we'll slip and score it all the way down. And we're going to reinforce these seams. Something to think about is how you move in here. You need to make sure that you can access everything. And this one isn't too bad. It's not so tall that you couldn't reach everything. The piece that we'll do that is a cylinder might be a little problematic if you've got really big hands. So if you find that you are unable to reach in to here, if you have very large hands, or more problematically on the cylinder piece, then we can talk about changing the size a little bit. But I think everyone should be able to reach in here. And we're getting that corner that we made right in to those seams. And we're gonna push it into the seams going up as well. And you're really kind of like really pushing it in and stretching out that coil. So I've got coils in there, and I want to take some time to really compress those, really smooth everything out. I don't need them to be excessively thick. In fact, it's not good if they're very thick in there, because then you're creating a thick spot that could shrink differently than the rest of your piece. You worked really hard to make all your slabs consistent, so we don't want these to really, we don't want these to thicken up your piece too much. So you can remove the extra clay that you don't need and really just compress those seams. Just taking away any extra thickness that I don't need, because the roundness of my finger is really plenty of clay in there, so I don't really need it to be any thicker than the radius that my finger makes against the angles. I want those to be nice and smoothed out, nice and clean. I can use a rib if I want and get in there and smooth everything down. Once I'm happy with the inside, that it's compressed, that it's smooth, I'm going to put my top on. I want to make sure that the top is pretty level. Sometimes your slabs can get a little bit off level when you're putting them together. So if it seems really off, take your ruler, find where the lowest point is, mark it, and then you can use your rasp, mark it all the way around, and you can use your rasp to thin down or cut down any place that's too high. This looks pretty good, so I'm just going to go ahead and put my top square on. And again, always slipping and scoring, getting it nice and gummy. We won't be able to reinforce this joint, so we're just going to make sure that we really compress it well. All right, so we've got, this is scored, this is scored, this is symmetrical, so I can put it down kind of however. If you're doing something that's hard slab that is not symmetrical, you really need to pay attention to what side of your piece you've scored and making sure that it's in the right orientation. I'm just going to start by gently applying pressure to the edges. I don't want to push on the inside because I don't want to collapse the top or cause it to crack or warp. Once I feel like it's set down fairly well, I'm going to run my finger over that, applying consistent pressure and really sealing that down. And I've got it nice and sealed now. I've got a box that is fully sealed. I'm going to run a rubber rib along this to remove that extra slip. All right, so I've got a box. It's rough. It's squared up. It's nice and solid. But I need to wait. I need to give this some time for all the edges to set up, all the seams to get just as hard as the piece, so I can start to clean this up. I can start to rasp away the extra pieces, to rib it down and make it really, really smooth. So we're gonna have to wait on this. Here is my cube. It has set up, the seams have set up to get to the same consistency as the rest of the slabs, and we put this together at sort of like a cheese stage, a little bit of like a hard cheese stage, so that we'd have nice, crisp, solid cube sides. And I need to clean this up. I'm going to use my rasp and take away any extra clay that is a little off or just not clean. We don't really need clay edges to be 90 degrees. Your eye will adjust if it's smoothed out a little bit. When things are fully 90 degrees, they tend to chip, and we want to avoid chipping and avoid having such a sharp edge. So I'm going to go with my rasp and not just clean up things that are a little off, but also just bevel out any 90-degree angles, which we have a lot of because it's a cube, right? So I'm going to bevel things out and also kind of smooth things a bit if I feel it needs it. Smoothing out slabs is a kind of a back and forth process. You'll notice that your edges will come back as you smooth things with your ribs. So you might end up doing this multiple times because as you smooth it out, the clay compresses and moves, and you end up with sharp edges once again. There are many, many edges on this thing. Many edges to address. Let's make sure we get all of them. You can see this is grating really nicely like a harder cheese. That's what we're looking for. This side. I think I've gotten all my edges. I have. And I'm going to clean up all these shavings so they don't get on the piece as I'm working. It's important to keep a clean workspace when you get, especially when you get down to these last stages of cleaning things up. You want to make sure you have a clean workspace so you're not undoing the work that you've been doing. So I'm going to start with my metal rib, and I'm going to start to compress and rib down, making sure my rib is clean. I'm not going to worry too much about my my edges right now because I know that I'm going to have to go back and re-bevel them. So I'm more focusing on the smoothness of each side. And you'll see as I smooth, the bevels are going to kind of disappear. And I want to kind of feel and make sure, like this side has a little bit of a wobble to it, so I'm going to take away a little bit of this clay that I can feel. We're going for as perfect a cube as you can get. Make sure my rib is clean. It's always important to keep that rib clean. It can, even just if you put your rib down for a minute to do something, that clay, that little bit of clay is going to dry on there and scratch across your piece if you're not careful. can see that happening there. Alright, so I've used my metal rib on all of my sides, and I'm going to go back with my rasp again and take away a little bit of clay again because most of my bevels have disappeared and gotten a little bit messy. Alright, so I'm just going to run my fingers along the edges, smoothing out those sides. And then I'm going to do the same thing with the rubber rib. And depending on your preference of softness, we have different, so the yellow is a little harder than the red is, depending on what you want to do. And also depending on how dry your piece is, you use a harder rib. So as this piece sets up and gets harder, I would use a harder rubber rib to help compress the piece. So you can see as I do this, it's getting smoother. The sides are getting a bit of a sheen to them. I want to smooth out those edges. And when I've done that all the way around my cube, I'm going to let this continue to set up and get to that chocolate stage. And as it sets up, I want to keep going back to it with a clean rubber rib. And you might change over to the yellow one that's in the cabinet as it gets firmer. Always make sure it's clean because you don't want to scratch the surface you're creating. But this is how you're going to get that hyper smooth surface, is going in with the rasp, taking away any imperfections, compressing them with the metal rib and then with the rubber ribs, and going back and forth with your edges to make sure they are very clean and straight with a curved over 90-degree angle. And there is your cube.